Hello, and thank you so much for joining me again today as we dig into the Bible together again, as we explore another minor character that the Bible introduces us to and think about what we can learn from their life, from their lessons to apply to our own lives. So today we're going back into the Old Testament. Now, I think any of us who have spent much time in church, in Sunday school, reading the Bible would know the story of King Saul and David, this young shepherd lad, a man after God's own heart, who ends up taken into service for the king of Israel to play music whenever Saul was having a particularly bad day, or as the Bible tells us, when he was being tormented by an evil spirit. And David, he goes on to beat Goliath, the classic underdog story. He goes on to lead Israel's army to victory in innumerable battles, helping to deliver God's own people. He goes on to become the king of Israel, a king to whom all of the kings who followed after him would be compared. But how did David get there? How did he end up in the courts of the king of Israel, the shepherd from Bethlehem? How did that journey begin? It's very easy to overlook today's minor character in the Bible, and yet today's character played a pivotal role in that story. It was one of Saul's own servants, and his story is found in the book of 1 Samuel. It says this: "So Saul said to his attendants, 'Find someone who plays well and bring him to me.'" This after the attendants had suggested that maybe a little bit of relaxing music would help Saul every time the evil spirit came and attacked him. One of the servants answered, "I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. He is a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is a fine-looking man, and the Lord is with him." Now, this might be one of the most minor characters in the Bible that we have considered so far this year. We don't know the guy's name, we don't know who he was, we don't know what he did, what his role was. All that we know is that he was a servant of Saul. Those couple of sentences are all that is written about him in the entire Bible. And yet he played an absolutely vital part in this story. And I wonder if this man had any inkling of how important his words would be, how his suggestion would steer the course of Israel's history. I highly doubt it. If you asked him, he'd probably say, but I didn't do anything. We have no idea what impact the seemingly insignificant things in our lives may have. It can be so easy to look back on this year so far, on 2023, and say, yeah, but I've not accomplished anything yet this year. I've not done anything. But this is a wonderful thing about God. He can take what little we can do, what little we can bring, what little we can say, and he can use that seemingly insignificant offering to achieve something incredible. You don't need to be a king to have an impact on this world. You can be someone at work, going about your everyday normal routine at home, who makes a throwaway comment that changes somebody's life forever, even if you never see the outcome of it. This servant, we assume, was just doing his everyday job. We don't know exactly what his role was. Saul was talking to his attendants at the time, and then this servant pipes up with his suggestion. Maybe he was cleaning the room. Maybe he was laying out some formal robes for Saul for later in the day. Maybe he was bringing food and water to those people. We don't know, but whatever happened, it seems he heard this conversation, and decided to chip in. Whatever he was doing, you can rest assured it probably wasn't overly high on the list of significant jobs. He wasn't fighting a battle. He wasn't preaching to thousands. He was working. He was in the midst of the 9-to-5 grind. And I wonder if he ever thought to himself, looking at the king of Israel, looking at his warriors, looking at all these mighty people around Saul, and thought, wow, look at them. I'm just a servant. I wonder if we've ever said anything a little bit like that. I'm just this. I'm just that. I'm not really that important. My work doesn't change the world. And yet, God can use anything to bring about his purposes on earth. God can use our normal, everyday routines to do something incredible. And I love that although we really don't know very much about this man, still through the couple of sentences that we have recorded about his life in the Bible, we can tell quite a bit about his personality. See, he was clearly a man who saw the best in people. Now we know from when David was anointed to be king that the prophet who went to do the anointing, Samuel, thought at first that actually it probably should be one of David's older brothers. They looked more the part. It was easy to overlook the youngest son, the shepherd boy. And yet this servant, he saw the potential in David. And David was probably only a teenager at this time. At this point, he certainly had never been involved in a military battle. We know he'd had experiences with lions and bears, but he wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a fighter. And yet that's exactly what the servant saw when he looked at him. He described him as a brave man and a warrior. This teenage guy. Imagine if when we looked at people, at anyone around us every day, we didn't look at the problems, we didn't look at the things that we might not like, but instead we saw their potential. And the servant did more than just see it in David. He spoke it out. There is so much power in the words that we speak. As James tells us in his book of the Bible, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. And we often think about this in terms of the negative impact that the tongue can have. It's unsurprising as James goes on to talk about the tongue being set on fire by hell itself. But while we do have the capacity to cause great harm with our words, we also have the capacity to do so much good. You know, it's so easy to see somebody doing something great, but just to let it pass by, to say nothing, to assume that somebody else is going to praise that person for their work. We don't need to do it. But we should be willing to speak out for good, to speak out encouragement, to build up and not to tear down. And I'm not saying that we need to lie about people to make them seem better than they are. I'm not saying we need to fabricate things or make things up about a person just so we have something good to say. What I'm saying is that we can ask God for help to look at his people with his eyes, to look and see the potential within them, and to be willing to speak that out. But also to be willing to speak out good things about others in the company of other people, just like this servant did. How often do Christians today get caught up in gossip and slander? How easy is it to criticize, especially online, especially as we're typing rather than talking? But it's so, so important for us to think, how are we using our words, whether spoken or written? Are we using them to build people up, or are we using them to tear people down? I love that there's a character in the book of Acts whose name is Joseph, but who we never know by that name because all of the apostles called him Barnabas, which literally means son of encouragement. I think that's incredible. This man was such an encourager that his people gave him a nickname to reflect that, and it became what he was known by. The only way that he could have ever earned that reputation was by speaking that encouragement out loud. This servant of Saul's, he saw the absolute best in David, and he was willing to speak it out. And I think that he was actually quite a brave guy, because he spoke up when he could have remained silent. He, in some respect, put his neck on the line to recommend David, to speak so highly of this young shepherd guy. What if it hadn't worked out? We know that Saul was already being tormented by an evil spirit at this point. We know from later in his story that he was willing to throw a spear at David to try and kill him, to even do the same to his son, Jonathan. What could he do to a servant, a nameless, seemingly insignificant servant, if he gave a suggestion that turned out to be bad? His job could have been on the line, his freedom, even his life. But he was willing to speak anyway. Why? I kind of asked myself that question as I was reading through this passage this week. I wondered, is it because he was a really good friend of the family to Jesse in Bethlehem and he wanted to recommend this son of his? I don't know, maybe. But I think it's more probable that it's because of the last part of these couple of recorded sentences in the Bible, because he recognized that the Lord was with David. And he realized that what Saul needed most was not merely a good musician, it was the Lord. How astute this man was. The Lord is what all of us need the most, right? It's what everyone needs the most. And it's so important that we don't shy away from letting people know that. I don't consider myself an evangelist. I find it quite hard actually to talk about my faith to random people on the street. It doesn't come naturally to me to bring Jesus into the conversation at all times, to point people toward him, but I want to be willing to do that. We may not all be called to be evangelists, but we are all of us called to evangelize. That great commission that Jesus shared in Matthew chapter 28, go and make disciples of all nations, that is something for all of us to do. And standing out on the street with a placard saying the end is nigh might not be the best way to do that, the most effective method, but perhaps just speaking up in a conversation, just being willing to talk about your experience with Jesus. Maybe even just mentioning going to church on a Sunday. Perhaps those little words, those seemingly insignificant words, could have a far greater impact than you could ever imagine. And perhaps those words would be more willingly listened to if we are known as a people who are willing to speak out for others, as a people who are able to see the best in everyone, to see their potential. If we are people who are always ready with an encouraging word. Well, thank you so much for joining me today for that thought from the Bible. If you have any comments at all, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment to this video. Let me know what you get out of this story. Do you find it easy to be an encourager? Do you recognize the power of your words in the way that you speak, positive or negative? Let's talk about it. But thank you so much. I'll be back on Wednesday next week with another video, another minor character from the Bible to explore and see what we can learn from. So thank you. I will see you then.